Yeah, all right, people. This is the Fantasy Grounds Academy. I am Laren, and we're going to be taking a look at some map packs that I had found that had come through my DMs Guild email. Essentially, it's a map pack that you can buy on the DMs Guild, and I'm not really trying to sell their product because normally I just kind of get my own thing, but I thought it was kind of a neat thing to share with you guys. If you plan on running the new adventure for the Wizards of the Coast, um, this is basically the Shattered Obelisk. Basically, I did a summary here. I've been working on this for probably a couple months now, since June. And I've been kind of going through and keeping an eye on the videos and previews and such. I guess this is probably one of the only real settings I've been excited about other than Dragonlance. Most of the other releases have been pretty meh. But this one actually is going to be a remaster of Lost Mines of Phandelver and then some. So they're going to be adding more content. So the book is over, like, I think it's like 200 and some odd pages. And essentially, it's going to take place in Phandalin, like the classic adventure. But they're also going to go into the Underdark. And here's some of the artwork that comes from that content. So basically, there's going to be new monsters, a new twist on some of the events that had happened from the original, and they're going to remaster, or they've remastered the first adventure, which is the original Lost Mine of Phandelver. So essentially, you're kind of getting a book and a half. So you're getting more monsters, NPCs, a little bit more update on artwork and such, and then you're getting an additional stretch of adventures. I don't remember what the original page count was on the Lost Mine of Phandelver, the original, but they've essentially updated it, and they're going to introduce new monsters. Probably the most exciting thing for me is the new monsters and kind of the rehash on how they're going to handle the goblins, some of the unique creatures. So if you've been around watching the D&D Beyond podcasts or the video streams, are previewing a lot of the content. So it's really not a big secret anymore about what's coming out. So we got about 2 weeks or so before the actual official content comes out. So what I had done is I kind of revisited the usages of images in Fantasy Grounds. And one of the things that we tend to do, especially when we're new, is basically having the trouble with maps, and generally speaking, they're always too big. Too big means like dimensionally too big, and they have like more than 100 squares from axis Y and Z. So, when you have a huge map like that, you kind of run the risk of having problems if you're going to share it with a group of people. So that's still a thing, although you can get away with bigger files now, but you still have to kind of watch the dimensions. Once you start getting past 2K in quality and dimensions and such, it really starts to tax Fantasy Grounds, especially your players that are on the other end. It might work good locally, but when you go to share it, it could be a problem. So that's something you want to keep in mind. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because I purchased a map pack on the DMs Guild, which I'm going to bring that up. So I got Fantasy Grounds up, and basically what I'm going to be doing is importing the assets that I got from that Phandelver resource kit. So it's kind of neat. So essentially what we got here is you have these PDF guides. So I bought the whole bundle because they broke it down into chapters. So they have a guide here for the map. So let me change this to large icons. Let me go with huge so you guys can see what I'm doing here. And let's see, I want to make that view size extra large. Okay, so this is for each chapter. There's like a resource pack, and then this first one is just a little note here. So what this is telling you is the dimensions. So that's an important aspect of Fantasy Grounds. So whenever you're importing something, it's good to have the dimensions and know what the information is. So this is kind of important. So the one we're looking at, though, is 72 DPI JPEG for virtual tabletop. So essentially, that's more for loading into online software, kind of make it a little bit less impactful on resources. and it's not so huge. These other ones are for virtual tabletop or for poster printing. And then this 300 DPI PDF map spread has a bunch of stuff for home printing. So there's different formats to use for this, but it tells you the default paper size and the scale. So if you're going to print it for like in-person use and such, they give you that. So that's kind of a good thing. I like that they did that, because that really helps with people that are new. And this is the sort of thing you want when you buy content. You want that instruction, you know, that help. So just as an example, if you pull up the resource pack, this is going to detail the content. So it says, when traveling the lawless lands south of Neverwinter with this classic starter adventure, our DM resources pack contains everything you need for Chapter 1 of the classic Lost Mine of Phandelver adventure. You got maps, virtual tabletop tokens by Devon Knight, so I'll show you those shortly, and plenty of tables and extra character details and that sort of thing. So this tells you what's in how to use the resources, what's in the pack, and then they go into the Goblin Ambush, and it just kind of talks about some alternative things that you can do. For like the ambush, you can have alternative events. There's some actual like details on the goblins, which I really like, because you got actual names, and then you have the ranged fighters, and then you have the goblin ambushers. So it kind of gives you additional content, which I might actually import this stuff into Fantasy Grounds, make my own tables and stuff. So I might actually use some of this, because it's supplementary and it's like more detailed. So I don't see why this would be an issue. It's mostly just tables and a little bit of text, so it wouldn't be too hard to put these stuff into Fantasy Grounds. So that's basically what I'm going to end up doing for myself. And if I do plan on running that adventure or a campaign, I'm going to use some of the assets that I'm working on now. So that's kind of what this whole show is about, is having some alternative assets to the ones that you get from Wizards of the Coast, because a lot of those are not conducive to virtual tabletop at this point. So most of their products are for print or for the hardbacks. They're not really set up and designed for virtual tabletop. I'd say 90% of them are that way. I don't know why they haven't started switching over, but I imagine they're going to reserve it for when they put out their own content. So we'll see what happens for virtual tabletop. But you have this breakdown and the supplemental stuff for each chapter. So if you're going to run this adventure, this is a good opportunity to get a little bit of additional information about the encounters. And here's Chapter 4. The other one I was looking at was Chapter 1. So yeah, it has different tables, like this one for Wave Echo Cave. There's a bunch of bodies strewn about from centuries ago. So this gives you an idea of what they were. And it's based off the lore. It's not just, you know, it's made up, but it's not completely unrelated. That's kind of what I'm getting at. So then they talk about the Forge of Spells, and it's pretty neat. I like what they did here. So that's one reason I supported them and bought this pack. Plus, it's on sale. So as of August 28th, 2023, they have probably a week sale. So I don't know exactly how long it's going to last, but hopefully up until at least Labor Day, they'll have this, or Memorial Day, excuse me. Is it Labor Day? Yeah, Labor Day. So anyways, this is the map pack stuff, the information that they give you in addition to the maps. And then when I come back over to the screen here, I'm going to be looking at the heroic maps for Chapter 1. So when I look at these, there's 2 different maps of each version. So what we have here are, this is the Kragmaw Hideout virtual tabletop version. This one has a grid baked in, and this one doesn't. So you have 2 versions of each. So in this one you have Kragmaw Hideout, you have the Goblin Ambush, and then you also have the trail, let's see, and then you have the Road Ambush. So that's really cool. So you have like all the main maps, including the ones that were not originally inputted into the setting when it first came out. So I wonder if they're going to fix that. I'm curious to see if Wizard of the Coast is going to actually put a battle map in that first chapter instead of leaving it as Theater of the Mind. We'll see. I doubt it, but you never know. So then that's just an example of the maps. And then when we actually go into the tokens, we'll take a look at those. So Devon Knight tokens, you guys should be familiar with those. But basically, I'm going to extract these as I need them, and what I'm going to do is just kind of extract them and leave. I'm going to leave them in those folders, and the reason for that is it's nice to have a little division between your token packs or even map packs, because when you put them in Fantasy Grounds, they can get really messy if you mix them all together. So I kind of made that mistake early on when I was first learning how to use Fantasy Grounds, and I just heaped a whole ton of tokens into one folder, and I really wish I hadn't done that, because now eventually I'm gonna have to go through all those and figure out what I want to keep and which ones I want to delete. I'm gonna basically probably end up starting over, because I made a lot of mistakes when I was first starting, and just tons of maps, and it's just unnecessary. So you'll learn after time that, a lot of the stuff you do is probably over the top. But nonetheless, these are the token packs. So like, for instance, this is for Chapter 1. So you got the Goblins, and then you have Gundren Rockseeker, and you have Sildar, and you have Sildar as a prisoner. And then here's the Goblin Archer. Here's the wagon with the oxen is pulling, and here's one with the driver, and then here's a wolf, and then here's a wrecked wagon that's busted up, and then here's a dead horse. So you have a lot of the assets that you might use when you are playing the game in a virtual tabletop, or even around a table. You can get the stuff printed. So I kind of like this, but the only thing about using this type of asset is that it can get washed out in the map. So hopefully we'll see what that looks like. But if it becomes an issue, I'm going to have to spend the time and put the base or a base on these so that there's some contrast between the map and the token. That could be problematic, especially if you're old and your eyes don't work as well. So these are just some of the Chapter 1 tokens that are in that pack. So I think I picked that thing up for about 30 bucks. And I think with all the tokens you get, plus all the maps for every chapter, I think it was totally worth it. Plus you're getting those PDFs that have the extra tables and stuff that you can add to your game. So here's Chapter 2. So this has some stuff from Phandelver, and then a couple of adventure pieces that come up during Chapter 2. So that's really neat. So you have all the main NPCs, and you have the monsters too, which is really cool. And these are all high quality Devon Knight stuff. And looking at this, when I select the file size, it's only 105 kilobytes. And if I right click and go to the properties, it's not a very big file. It is a PNG, which is fine. And it's 400 by 400 pixels, so it's a little big pixel size, like dimensionally. But it's going to be the point where you're going to have to shrink them down in Fantasy Grounds or manually convert them. So he left them kind of big so that you can adjust them where you want. It's easier to shrink something than to expand it. So it's better to start off with a bigger file than a smaller one. But that also increases the file size on these, but they're optimized in such a way that these aren't even a quarter of a megabyte in size. So I think I'm going to leave them as they are and just resize them as I need them. I don't think I need to go through, but you could take a program and do a, essentially you could do like a batch file convert, and you could take these and convert them. The problem is you want to be careful with the rectangular token. So in other words, in this first pack that I was looking at, I saw a rectangular token that you'd probably have to manually adjust that one, or you would convert it to like 200 or 400, or it'd have to be square essentially instead of rectangular. Let me just take a look at that. So that was Chapter 1. So let's take a look. Yeah, so this one is about these ones that are actually these more rectangular shapes. These are 512 by 1024, so those are a little big, but they are bigger assets. And then the horses are what, 400 by 400, so those are the same. So that'd be the only ones you got to watch out for are those three. Those are the ones that are rectangular in shape. You'd have to kind of manually do those. But the rest of these, you could do a batch convert in Photoshop or whatever program you have and convert them all to 200 by 200. So if you were worried about size and bulkiness, you could probably, shrink them down. But the recommended size for small to large creatures is anywhere between like 100 to 200. So small to medium would be like, 100, and then you'd have 200 for larger creatures, and then for huge creatures it's 300. But all of these are 400 or greater, so that's something you'll have to, it's a trade-off between quality, size, and such. And I don't really think you have to worry about the size too much. So if I hover over this is 400 by 400, and the file size is pretty small. It's essentially 125 kilobytes, so that's not too bad. So I might take and actually convert these over. I might change them into a WebM file and preserve the transparency on them, and that way they'll even be smaller. So the less impact you have on Fantasy Grounds overall, the better. So you think, oh, it's just one token, but when you add all those up and then you put them in a folder and you're sharing those out in Fantasy Grounds, all that stuff, little stuff adds up over time. Especially as your campaign grows and you're sharing more and more content. That's something you got to look out for. So essentially, these are broken up into chapters. I think I'm going to leave them that way, but I want to make sure that I have everything kind of, labeled and ready to go. So I'm going to take the catalog number off of this. I probably shouldn't, because it will remind me what the catalog number was on the DM's Guild, so I'll probably leave that actually. And then the tokens themselves, I want to break these up. So this is, what I want to do is use the same format for the text. So I'm going to edit this text, copy it, and then I'm going to put it down in here. But then I'm going to change it to 1 instead of 3, because I want the titles kind of match up. And I don't know where these Devon tokens necessarily come from, because I don't know what chapter. Maybe there's just a generic. So I want to go through these and see. Okay, so they all say Devon tokens, but they're from different packs. So this is from chapter 3. Okay, I see. So what I might do is take this one might come from one of these other ones. Let me check this one out. Yeah, so that's chapter 4. So I don't really need this one, so I'll get rid of that. So here's all the chapters, and then inside is a subfolder called Devon tokens. I don't think I want that, so I'm gonna actually cut these, and I'm just gonna put them in the upper level folder under the chapter, because I don't want several subfolders that says Devon tokens, because that will get confusing as heck. So I'm going to go through all of those tokens and redo the direct. See, this one's, that's what I want. I don't want another layer of, another a subfolder like this. So I'm going to take all of these, cut and paste them into the main directory. That way, when I go to use them in Fantasy Grounds, I'm not confused. So that's kind of what I'm doing now, is taking the time to organize the assets. It's very important to do this before you even import them, because this is where the mess starts. Once the file names are messed up, or you have them all in one folder, and it can be a real nightmare. So you got to kind of take the time to organize your assets before you add them into Fantasy Grounds. It really does pay off in the long run, and believe me, I got millions of tokens, and I made the same mistakes of putting them in and then going, oh crap, now So this one, I want to change this to _, even though I'm not going to worry about this right now. I want it to match the other file format and the titling. So this one said Lost Mine of Phandelver, and then it didn't really have a chapter, so I went ahead and just changed that because I want it to actually look like these others. And I'm not going to import those zip files, but when I go to archive these, I want them all to kind of match. I don't want a big mess, you know, a bunch of... See, here's one that these two aren't labeled the same. So when you get stuff from the DM's Guild, occasionally your artist or whoever did these is going to rename these and not keep a consistent file name, which can be problematic down the road. So I want all this to match. So I'm going to put the underscore in here, and that way it doesn't cause me grief when I go to import these into Fantasy Grounds, because I want them organized. I don't want a big clunky mess, because that's what's when it starts is right here. This is when you start getting confusion, broken links, you know, all kinds of crap. And if you try to rename this stuff after you've imported it, you run the risk of breaking the links in Fantasy Grounds, because they're all associated with file names and such and folders. And once you start moving that crap around, it can break a lot of stuff, depending on what it's attached to. So I'm going to go ahead and cut those out. But what I should do, honestly, if I was going to do this for a commercial project, is I would do all the resizing now. But I'm not going to worry about the resizing. But that's what I would do. If I was going to make a module and sell this on the DM's Guild as a Fantasy Grounds module, I probably would do that. Because right now, as it stands, when I highlight over these, all the tokens, let's see, we got 1.5, we've got 4 there, so that's like 5, roughly 6. And then we got 7, 8, 9, and 10, 11, 12. So about 13 megabytes worth of tokens there between all of those 4 folders. So if we used a program like, for instance, we can use the Shutter encoder, which is a lot of us are using to redo the assets that we get that are in the wrong animated file format. And that's also another thing I wanted to bring up, is I have another patron that does the animated versions of Lost Mine of Phandelver map, so I might take a look at those too. But you know, I've got all my options. I've got the regular static images, and then I've got some animated ones that I might revisit later, but not in this stream though. So once you have those straightened out, and looks like they're all named pretty well, so you know, you got the ox wagon, you know, you got all this stuff, so it looks like the titles are good. So if you're not worried about the file names, or you don't care about it, then I'm going to go ahead and copy this out. And then what I'll do is in Fantasy Grounds, I want to open up my assets folder, which is over here on the right under the library. Go to assets. Now it's important to know the difference between a token and an asset. So a token asset is essentially a token. Those get assigned to players, NPCs, like objects. For images, those are actually part of a map or a collage or some artwork. So they are different. And if they're stored in these two different locations, they function differently in Fantasy Grounds. You can have them in both, but that can get a little confusing. So you might use a token that's decorative for one thing, but then use it as an art piece in another. So there might be occasions where you might want one copy of each in both areas, but I would try not to do that, or at least rename them. So here's the token folder. So if you click on the folder down below, that's the asset folder. And this is actually in the campaign folder. So if you wanted these tokens to be available for you in, let's say, all your games and not just this campaign, then you would put it in Fantasy Grounds under the tokens folder here. Instead of doing it at the campaign level, you would do it at this level, so you can access those tokens from regardless of what campaign you're in. But in this case, it's going to take me to the campaign folder by default, and then I can put them in here. So if I hit Control V for paste, it's going to add the folders. And then I'm going to minimize this, and then anytime you add anything, take anything away, or rename stuff or change directories, you got to hit this refresh down below. And once I do that, you'll see a folder pop up. It'll say campaign. So the campaign folder won't show up until you do start putting in your own content. So I'm going to go ahead and click refresh, and it will go through, and now I have a folder called campaign. So that's what it does initially. Once you've done it the first time in the campaign, you don't have to do it over and over. It's just the first time, then you'll get the folder. So now that I have the campaign folder, if I click on that, these are all the campaign tokens that are specific to this session. And I open these up, and here they are by chapter. So that's why I left them in those subfolders, because if you have them all in one folder, they're much harder to sort, and there's no separation. And then if you go, oh, this one was in chapter 1 or 2, you know, you can really get confused. So I'm just going to look at these real quick, take a look at them. They look really good. So this is what you want to see when you have a token collection. Is you kind of want a little bit organized. You don't necessarily want to have them all over the place or in one huge folder. Because if you notice, it takes a while for Fantasy Grounds to index images. So when you have them all grouped up like that, it takes like a minute for it to open up a bunch of tokens. And that's another thing, is having too many tokens. There is such a thing. So try to only limit to what you need for your campaign if possible. Once your players have picked their tokens and you have the stuff assigned for your NPCs, generally speaking, you shouldn't need 50 million of them. And if you do want to do it like that, store them on the upper level instead of the campaign level. That way it's kind of more on the upper data structure for Fantasy Grounds, and not just sitting all in one campaign, because then it's harder to access when you're in a different game session. So that's something to keep in mind. So this is all the tokens. So basically this is some basic management, file management, organization, those sort of things. It goes a long ways in Fantasy Grounds, it really does. So the next thing I'm going to look at are the maps. So I'm going to go ahead and close the assets for now. I probably should have left it open, but I'll just close it for now. And then I made a group in this images area. I'm calling it Heroic Maps Lost Mine of Phandelver Bundle, because that's what this is. And if I do this right, I can actually export this as a module for myself, not for sale, but just for myself. So if I want alternative maps, I'll have all the line of sight set up, and then all I have to do is relink the rooms to this. And they did set this up to work with Roll20. So if you use Roll20, they have an overlay that basically just fits right on top of the existing map, so you don't have to change the line of sight and such. But in Fantasy Grounds, it works a little differently. So I don't think they can do it like that. But nonetheless, this is basically how I organize that, and I got my own group here. So this is Heroic Maps Lost Mine of Phandelver Bundle. So that's what I've done here. So the next step is to bring over the map. So I'm going to go back to my data folder where I've downloaded everything. And then here are the tokens. So I want to go back to the first level. So these are the maps. So we have 2 versions of each, and they are all essentially just a grid and no grid. I don't know if I need both of them, to be honest, but I'll just bring them over just so they're complete and I don't break up the sets. But I'm kind of weary about doing that, but that's just, you know, it's a choice that you have to make early on. You know, do you want the extra maps in there? Because it adds more overhead, but, you know, you might need a situation where you don't want the grid on there. So, yeah, because some of these makes these folders a heck of a lot larger than they need to be if you don't need one or the other. So it's kind of up to you and, you know, what your priorities are. And if you have an older machine or a really slow internet or whatever, I would probably reduce that stuff down as much as possible. I wouldn't worry about having both versions. If you're not too worried about bandwidth or you're not running a game or anything, you know, you could just leave them both like that. But in this case, I'm going to leave them. But I think if I work on this anymore, I'll go through and I'm going to actually convert these all to different formats. So I'll probably go with the WebM format, which is even smaller. So if I click and hover on these folders, here's one that's 437 megabytes. That's really big. This one here for chapter 1 is only 55. Let's see, chapter 3 is 152, and chapter 4 is 56. So you get some pretty large file sizes here. So, you know, since I own this, I'm going to go ahead and clean these up. So the ones that have the grid, I don't want those. If you can find the ones that say no grid, I want those. The ones that say grid, like VTT grid, I want to get rid of those. So grid. I want to make sure I'm getting the right one. So I'm taking away the ones that already have a grid baked into them. They're kind of pointless. It also gives you a little bit more flexibility on scaling your map. So if you don't have to worry about the grid, then that's perfect. However, if you're going to resize these, it may be good to keep the grid so you have some reference of scale. But in this case, I'm not worried about it. So I'm keeping the no grid versions. So there, it cuts the maps in half. So this is the extra step that you should be going through in order to keep these. So I just want it to be clean, and I don't want all the hassle. So here's a grid version. So grid, no grid, grid. Okay, grid. So these are the ones that I do not want. The ones that say grid. The ones that say no grid, I'm going to keep those. So I'm going to say that 50 more times until you guys get it. But no, I'm just kidding. I think that the point I'm trying to make is the organizational part. It's very critical, especially early on, because once you set this in there, it's pretty much set in stone. So this is the grid. I want to make sure I'm getting the right one. See, there's an overlay, which I'm interested to see. That will be like a rooftop or something that goes over, or the hideout. So I'm really interested to see how that's going to work. But virtual tabletop, there's no grid, grid, and grid. So I'm going to delete the ones that say grid. For a sec there, I thought I missed one, but it's okay. So there's chapter 2, and now going to chapter 3. Going to be doing the same thing. Why I have a new folder in there, I don't know. So there's chapter 3. Chapter 4, same thing. Okay, there we go. Alright, so now let's take a look at the file sizes. So this is now, yeah, it is half the size. The second one is still big. That's 220 megabytes. That's pretty big for maps and such. The ones that are under 100 megabytes, those don't bother me as much. It's this big one that's kind of bothers me a little bit. And that's just because it's huge. And that has a lot more maps in it. So it makes sense. There's a lot of assets in here. So what we want to do here is we can actually take Shutter encoder and bulk convert these. So let me see if I can figure this out. All right, so Shutter encoder is kind of a do everything kind of utility. So what I'm going to do is choose the function. So I want to go with, let's see if I can do WebP. Is this only for video? I thought it was also for download web video. Yeah, this might only be for without conversion, rewrap, merge. Yeah, this is only for video. So, oh, here we go. Image extraction creation. Okay. So what I'm going to do is bring up the first chapter, and I'm going to see if it accepts these, see if it'll work. Yeah. So now what I'm going to do is choose the output. So let me see if it does WebP. If not, I'm going to have to use another program. Oh, come on. So here's the images. Yeah, you can do JPEG. Yeah, that's not quite what I wanted it to do. That's all right. So no big deal. So what I'll do is I have GIMP that I can use that'll do the same thing. So if I go to GIMP, all I'm going to be doing is just converting the file format over to a WebP format, which will even make these files even smaller. It's amazing how small they are. I don't want to download that right now. So what I'm going to do is take these images and put them into GIMP, and I have an extension or like a mod that basically does the batch manipulation. So if I take all of those and just drag them over into GIMP, it'll open them up. Okay. It's saying it has a color profile. Whatever. Yeah, I don't care. I'll keep it. Alright, so we've got all the different files being loaded. Say, don't ask me again, just keep it. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm not going to resize these because that's what breaks the scale of the maps quite a bit. So what I want to do is just take them and do a batch manipulation. So we can do that without loading these. We don't even really have to load them, but I wanted to show you what it looked like. So if I go to, let's see, I want to say image, no, it's tools. Wait. File, batch manipulation. Okay, so what we're going to do is add the images that we're going to convert. So we're going to add single images or a folder. So what we want to do is go to add folder, and then I need to go to the directory where I have this stored. Oops, I don't want that. And then I have a lost mine or heroic maps folder. Okay, so we're going to essentially grab the 4 folders that contain all of the graphics. So I'm adding all those here. So this is just the files that I want to convert. Now I'm going to go to the add manipulation set, and all that's going to do is you can give it whatever you want. You can put a watermark on it, you can compress it. So I'm going to do change format and compression. So this is set by default to JPEG, so I'm going to actually go and go to WebP. And then your image quality, they recommend 75. So if you're going to do conversions, this is what Fantasy Grounds or Smiteworks recommends. So that actually comes from this here, the style guide and such. When you're using images, it's really important that you follow these guidelines, especially if you're making commercial assets for Fantasy Grounds. When you're doing it for yourself, there's a lot more flexibility. You don't have to do it. But I think for the sake of optimizing and making it easier for players to load and not having as many lag issues and that sort of thing, is I'm going to follow the recommendation, which comes from this wiki that tells you how to work with images within Fantasy Grounds, and it gives you the dimensions and roughly. It's in the developer's guide, so if you want to know where that is, you come into the Fantasy Grounds, and then there is a FAQ, troubleshooting article, so it's in here. Basically, let's see, it will tell you how to convert and what they have for their standards when you're actually making content. So you can do all kinds of conversion work, but if you don't follow the, you know, their tutorials and their methodology, they might kick it back to you depending on what it is and such. So if you're doing conversions for them, you want to check out these guides because they're kind of helpful. So essentially they'll have an area. So let me go with developer. That's what I want to look at. Okay, so developer guide. So here's the product guidelines. So here are the images. So files, they recommend static WebP files at 75% quality for the best trade-off between visual and file size for memory usage and file transfer times. So make sure to consider overall file size when including graphic assets, especially animated ones, as those file sizes add up. So these are actually static, but both static PNG files and animated WebM or WebP files are much larger formats, and they can create slowdowns if individual files or overall product size is too big. So this is, they're trying to say, hey, you know, just keep it down. Here's the recommended sizes is under 4K for static images, the high quality at 75%. These are images like player maps. And then they have for brushes, and they have for regular images, or for like shareables, and then here's the token stuff. So 256 by 256. So they changed this a little bit for the recommended size, and then 512 by 512 for larger. If WebP is preferred, as it allows for larger token resolutions and still produces smaller file size. But if you use PNGs, which is what we have, the acceptable format is 100 for small to medium and 200 for anything larger. So these are the guidelines for importing content into Fantasy Grounds. And here again is the bundle that I'm working from. So this is also an article that I'll have at the end of the video that kind of talks about Phandelver and below. And this is the developer guide again, and back to Fantasy Grounds. So now that we have that, I want to bring up the thing here, this thing, and once I hit apply, I want to say keep folder hierarchy because I want that to stay, stay pretty much the same. I'll say okay, keep the file. The folder hierarchy is like all the folders and stuff, and then the output is, where is it set to? See, this is set to the wrong folder. I don't want it set to there. I want it to output into my downloads folder, and then I'm going to go back into the same directory, but not the very same directory, but in the same folder, not the same subfolder. So here's the heroic maps, and then I'm going to hit OK. And once I do that, I'm going to hit apply, and it should go through and rewrite all of those images into different formats. So it's working on the files right now. So if you do a batch convert, this is probably about the maximum that I would do. Otherwise, you're going to tie up your computer for hours, especially if they're videos. If you use the Shutter encoder that I had up earlier, and you do a bunch of tokens that are animated or a bunch of maps, it's going to tie up your machine for a long time. So if you're going to do that, do it at night or when you go to the store or something, so it's not going to tie up your computer, or have a separate computer. So that's my advice on that. So this is going to take these files that are JPEGs and work on them and change them over to a different format. So that's what it's doing now. So it's going to take it a bit. So while it's doing that, I want to talk to you a little bit about the content that's coming out for the actual Shattered Obelisk. So from what I can tell, it's very straightforward until things start happening in Phandelver, and then when I say things like events and weirdness, so basically there is a kind of like a cult or something like that, and you have to thwart it. If you read the actual article here, I have a lot of this stuff, but basically you have like these psionic goblins They have a new creature called the Ashen White. There's these undead miners. They're kind of trapped forever in the mines, kind of doing their own thing, and they are doing the thing they were doing when they fell into tragedy. There's a bunch of monstrosities and mutations that have happened in the adventures. I'm not sure what exactly it was, because it doesn't tell you that, but at least you know. And there's something tied in with the Dwergar and some mind flayers and stuff, so it's got a lot of potential. And I like the idea that it's a dungeon crawl, but it's also the top side adventure to start with. So it goes from like 1 to 12, and it is a adventure that is set up for starting off, because it's going to have the remastered edition on top of, or in front of the changes that they made and the add-ons that they've done. So it essentially says it's an exploration of a world filled with mystery, lore, and endless possibilities. It invites players to become part of a living story. They can shape the world, whether battling sonic goblins, exploring ancient dungeons, or unraveling the secrets of the Shattered Obelisk. This adventure offers a gaming experience that is both profound and exhilarating. The world of From Below the Shattered Obelisk. Oh wait, so I don't think that was right. It's supposed to be Phandelver and Below. Anyways, maybe that's just shortened. But the adventure is going to be out on the 19th. So if you're waiting on that, that's that. I don't think there's a ton of people waiting on it. I think after all that Wizards of the Coast crap that happened earlier this year, a lot of people have kind of lost their interest. But I'm still excited about it. I think it's kind of a cool revisit, and I always liked that adventure. So this is like a kind of like a remix of it, I guess, but you're adding more to it. Let's see. So classic adventure with a dark twist. So a lot of the media outlets were saying that it's kind of a traditional fantasy, a kind of classic D&D feel, but it's kind of got a dark and foreboding twist, kind of like horror movie. It's kind of going to deepen the mystery and touch on those obelisks that are found around the realm. So if you've watched any of those videos, preview videos for this content, they talk about that a little bit. It looks like you're going to be heading down underneath Phandelver into the Underdark. There's a malevolent cult that threatens to overtake the region. And it's kind of up to you and your party to solve the mysteries and stamp out the growing corruption that's happening. So you kind of get to protect the town, in a sense. You get to be part of the town, which is kind of a natural progression. The Shattered Obelisk, an ancient relic, holds the key to the adventure. Its pieces are scattered and its powers are coveted by darker forces. The obelisk's history is intertwined with the ancient Netherese Empire, and its secrets could reshape the world. So I'm really curious how they're going to tie that in. So that sounds interesting to me. And then supposedly you kind of have a race against the clock. I wouldn't say a proverbial clock, but it's one of those things where the stakes are high and you have to beat the bad guys before they get all the pieces to the obelisk and stop some kind of ritual or something that threatens the town and beyond. So it's kind of a big campaign adventure, I guess. And then what's nice about it is there's so many resources for Lost Mine of Phandelver that at least the first half or the first third of the book, you're going to have tons of stuff to pick from. And like I said, this map pack thing I think it's brilliant. I liked what they did. They worked with Devon Knight. They also provide PDFs to help you run the chapters or give you some more content. So when you run the first beginning part, you're just really running Lost Mine of Phandelver kind of rebuilt. So I think that's kind of cool. But I kind of wish it would be entirely different, but that's just me. But they have to have a foundation. So they built on the original. And I kind of was hoping that it would take place later than, or something like that. But they do what they do, I'm not going to be too worried about it, but I'm really a stickler about timelines and history and how it ties in with everything. And it sometimes they just do weird stuff because it's easier for them. But when you're telling a story and you're already halfway through the story, that narrative kind of breaks. So you have to kind of switch gears. It's not a big deal. But I guess it is for parties from levels 1 to 12. So you get to explore both the town and below. battle creatures that have been warped beyond recognition. It takes a good look at the lore, storytelling aspect of it, some kind of memorable gameplay moments, and some adventuring that must be had for D&D enthusiasts. Yay. All right, so don't forget that about the developer guide, and I'll put that in the chat because that's probably a really good thing to know when you are working on content with Fantasy Grounds. It tells you, like, you know, what sizes they should be, and then if you try to develop or build your own content, just even if it's just for you, and you keep to these guidelines, this will really help your sessions quite a bit. It'll keep it from bogging down as much, and it won't be so hard on your players. Uh-oh, what do we got here? Got a problem, Houston. What's going on here? What's it saying? No, I don't want a problem. What is it saying? Calling an error, file P, web save, blah, 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 bad dimensions. Okay. I don't know what that means. Is it going to work, or does it stop working, or what's it doing? I don't like it when they do that. Let's see what's going on here. Huh. Did it crash on me, or what? I think I'm going to close this stuff and take a look. What's going on here? Okay, that's now full screen. What's this batch thing? It's not coming up. It's working, but why is it like not? It's disappearing as I do that. Maybe I have to do it over here. Nope. I don't know. But I don't like that when that happens, so maybe I need to close that. Could be. Yeah, it's goofy. So this is a plugin. It's not part, you know, directly a part of it. But I don't know why it's not letting me access it. I mean, I can see it. Let me choose Alt-Tab. That might do it. Alt-Tab. Let's see. What are you doing? What are you doing? Yeah, it's not even letting me tab over. So, anyways. So basically, the main gist of this video is to, you know, to bring in your assets and make it to where they're the right file size, the right dimensions, the right file names, all that stuff before you put it into Fantasy Grounds, because it can get to be a real freaking hassle. And if you don't do it that way and you don't follow through on your best practices, it's going to eventually catch up to you. And it's done it to me. I've bit myself in the butt too many times where I wish I could just start over, and I'm going to have to eventually. I mean, I don't have a bad setup now, but I have a lot of campaign folders that have barely anything in it. I need to go through all of my folders and get rid of stuff. It'd be very liberating. I'm really tempted to take everything out and just kind of leave like my main ones, like the last 5 or 10 that I've done, and then put the rest of them somewhere else in another folder or something for a backup, because it's just getting to the point where it's not even fun to do it anymore. So we'll see. But I'm gonna go ahead and quit. I want to see if what that does. So I'm gonna go into the folders now and see what happened. So campaigns. Oops. I didn't want that. That's the Fantasy Grounds directory. I want the file directory of the heroic maps. Let's see, did it change anything? Yeah, it sure did. It tried. It's probably got hung up on something here. Yeah, so these are WebP files. So I'm going to have to go through these and find out where it got hung up. Let me see how far it got. Let's see, did it do Chapter 1? It sure did. So let's take a look at just this first one. I want to make sure the image quality looks good and all that before I move on. Doesn't help to preview. Yeah, it looks pretty good, even zoomed in. So this would go into Fantasy Grounds, so I can do that now. So I'm just going to take this. This is a WebP file, and let's see how big it is. 3.42 megabytes, or 3.24. and this one is 5. So this is a JPEG. So it makes quite a difference to convert these over. It's pretty big dimensionally, like 4200 by 4200 is a pretty darn big map. I don't think I'd go much farther than that. I think 4800 by 48, it starts to get to the point where it's just way too big for Fantasy Grounds. And I'll show you what I'm talking about here. So yeah, that can be problematic dimensionally too. So that's pretty close to max on the dimensions. But if I'm going to import these, I can do it one at a time or I can do it in a group. I'm going to do these one at a time because I want to be certain they were converted correctly. And I'm a little bit concerned about the dimensions. So I'm going to try one just to see what, you know, how big it is and how it handles it. So if I go over to this folder here, and then I'm going to go to chapter 1. I want the WebP version, so I go ahead and open that up. And this is it's in this group, so I wanted that. And now let's take a look at the map in Fantasy Grounds. So it's a pretty good sized map as far as dimensions go, but it really was already a large map when it came from Wizards of the Coast. So let's zoom to Fed. Let's take a look at this. So it looks pretty good in Fantasy Grounds, I have to say. Yeah, so now the next point would just be to add your line of sight. If you wanted to add lighting for the little campfires, you could. You could actually put movement on the trees. So instead of putting a big line of sight thing in here, or like terrain, what you could do is just make this so it looks like these are moving, and then maybe just put terrain around the trunks so you can't see through the entirety of it, you know, because these aren't necessarily low-hanging branches everywhere, but this is supposed to be a blind, so it makes sense because if you look closely at how they drew this, they do have a lot of low brush here, and here's like their little hangout. So it does look like they've taken the time to detail this enough, and I like the idea that it's a little bit bigger dimensionally, so you can see what's going on. But I want to put a grid on it and see how that looks. See how many grids we get here. So I'm going to go to grid and set this to 72. Let's see what we get. And that's not quite. Let's try 70. So I know that these are mostly, yeah, so 70 is, so that's half the size of a Roll20 map, essentially. So Roll20 is normally 140. So as you can see, this is a huge, huge map. I mean, you've got, you know, over probably like 50 over here, and that's crazy. So let's see how many squares we got. So anyone know how to do that? So if you have a grid on here, and you kind of see what you're doing, I'm going to actually change this to yellow and then turn it down a little bit so it's not obnoxious. And I'm going to lock the layer because I don't want it to move on me. And yeah, that's about the right scale because you got this cave opening. It's not going to just be 5 feet necessarily. Yeah, it looks right. Okay, so it's 70. The DPI is 72, but the actual pixels per inch is 70 here. And you can tell because it's right up to the edge. So that's what you want to see. Alright, so I did that. Now what I want to do is go to the play mode as if you're going to be playing. And if you hold down both mouse keys, you can grab you basically form a pointer. So I'm holding both mouse keys down and I'm going to point. And when you do that, it's 295 feet. So, yeah, that's a huge map. So this might be a little problematic just for some of your players that have slower machines, or maybe they've got slow internet. It isn't so much the file size anymore because we've shrunk that down. What it is in this case is the dimensions. It's just too big. So ideally, I'd want this about half this size if I can, but I'm not going to change the resolution. And I'm going to test it probably. I'll have someone connect to me, and I'll just randomly have people join the table and see what happens when I force feed this map to them. But yeah, that's pretty big. That's like 300 wide. That's really big. Let's try this over here. So I'm doing the same thing. Yeah, 295 squares. Whew. That is 300 by 300 is what that is. If you go any higher than 400 by 400, you're going to crash. I'm sorry. It's just going to make problems. So this is kind of borderline. That's what I'm trying to say. Even though I went and reduced the file size, and it's not going to take as long to transfer, but the issue is the display size is too big. So this is something you got to watch out for on most maps. When you're making maps with programs that are like this, that you make your own, don't make them this big, or a little smaller than this, because this is really big. You know, if I really would think about this, you could probably cut off this bottom third and just make it from here across. Because they added probably, I don't know, what's this? So from right here to right here is probably unnecessary. I mean, if you're going to do a tactical battle, so that's an extra 70 feet right there. So that's probably part of, you know, you can probably cut it right there. And, you know, right where this cave is, where it starts here, you could probably cut at least this amount off and not break anything. Yeah, so that's 40 feet. So yeah, there's an extra 50 feet for sure in there. But I like the map. It's beautiful, it looks nice. I mean, imagine if you this map, but as a huge animated map with all that stuff, the trees and the birds and all that stuff. That's definitely going to be a problem once you start adding all that in, unless it's already baked into the map. Let's see. So I'm going to do line of sight, do the lighting. So what I'm going to do is take a look at the birdies, see what they look like. So I go to the brushes, and then if you go to your assets, and then go to images, not tokens, but images, I'm going to check out the animated birds, because they did add those to Fantasy Grounds. And if you've got a ton of assets like I do, it just takes a bit. You know, it's not easy to manage. So there's some animated bushes that we can put in here, which will look good. Some leaves. Here's some falling leaves. There's flames. This is this is from the new volcano pack that he just put out. But let's do the birds first. So I'm going to drag and drop those up here into up in this area here. And then you can paint these out where you want them. So those look kind of small. They look like they're down there a ways. So I'm going to make this like 25 by 25. Or 35 by 35. There we go. So now it looks like they're circulating closer to you from above. But I think that might be a little much. So I'm going to go 32 by, oops, 32. There we go. Now you can just stamp it if you want, or in this case you can draw it so like the birds come from here and they kind of go out the side. That's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to have it start here, right about, that's where the brush is going to start, right about there. And then I'm going to come down to where it kind of just starts to leave the map. There we go. And there's the birds kind of flying in a pattern around the area, probably looking for bugs that just hatched. So yeah, it's going to look pretty nice once everything's dialed in. Now you can recolor these so they stand out a little bit more, like you can make them a little bit lighter or darker depending. So if I go to here and I go to this painting layer, and let's go to we want paint, and then we got this layer selected, and we go to tint. Let's see if we can kind of spruce these up a little bit. So I can change the opacity a little. Change the color, brighten them up a little bit. Yeah. So that's just getting used to using the assets. Yeah, it kind of turned them a little bit yellow. Huh, interesting. Hit Control Z. I'm getting out of that. But yeah, this is just a kind of a way to embellish the maps. And I saw those bushes, so I want to see if that blends in with this very well since I'm here. I was curious about that when I was watching Josh's show. So again, I want to go to the brush thing, and in assets, I want to go over to the trees. So what I want to do is animated, and just use that as my key search. Animated, and hit enter. Okay, so there's this. This is a bush. These are leaves, like an overlay. Let's try that. So that looks about what I want, like what I want. So this is kind of something you'd park like around the edges of the trees. So that's cool. So let's just say we wanted it here. But before I do that, I'm going to kind of turn down the opacity a little bit, because I don't want it to be too overwhelming. And you just kind of park it right there. Yep, there we go. Let's see. Yep. So I want to actually stamp that instead. So stamp it. And turn this up just a hair. Stamp mode, and then go back to the assets. Yeah, this is the only thing. I have I don't know if I have, oh, this is an extension. If you guys haven't checked this out already, this is basically like a palette. And what it does is, I think Smiteworks will eventually incorporate something like this, but you can create your own palettes. So when you find your assets, you drop them on here. This other one is for tokens. This one's for brushes and fill assets. So this is handy. So you can do all your searching and then drop them all here instead of having to keep doing this over and over and over. So this is free. This is called For the Love of Painting or something like that. So I'm going to go back to the animated part and just type that in. And just for the sake of it, I want this tree, and then I want the butterflies, and then flowers, and I want the leaves, and what's that? Embers, flowers, flowers. This is falling leaves, and then okay, let's see if there's anything else I want. So this is just an example. So yeah, here's some more leaves. So I want those. And then these are smoke. I don't really need those. But if you had a campfire, this would be really cool for that. All right, so let's do that. So we'll just kind of go with that. And now that I have this, well, I can just park it here and just pull from there, instead of going through the assets every single time. So like I said, this is on the Fantasy Grounds Forge. It's free. Pick it up. So now what I'm going to do is go to the stamp tool and take this and drop it in the stamping tool thing, and then I'm going to take this thing here and turn it down a little bit so it's not so freaking, and I'm going to go with 5 instead of 5 points. I'll just do 5, and that will kind of send it down a little bit and park it. Yep, that is so perfect. Oh my god, that's going to be a game changer. So now we can turn the asset and then put it in like this and just kind of double up on what you already have. So it kind of gives you that illusion that, you know, you got trees here. And what's nice is you can do them in other layers. So let's just say we want to go higher up the tree. So I might go 2.5 and make it smaller, and then maybe turn it a different direction. So this one was facing up, so that one will be up here, and maybe I want the opacity to come up a little bit more as I go higher up, so you can see it more, or less, depending on your elevation. And yeah, this is a game changer here. Josh, if you're out there listening, make more of these because this is very useful. Like here's some trees here that are moving around, and turn the opacity down just a hair, and then I'm going to go with a 2.2, and then I'm going to park it down here. So you can just take this and add this, and it just brings life to the trees without, without breaking the bank here. And it just gives you that subtle movement. And the opacity gives it that translucence so that the stuff underneath doesn't get covered. Unless that's what you want. And then I'm going to rotate the stamp again and come down here. Oh yeah, this is really cool. I'm going to like this. This is going to inspire me to want to do more with it, because before it's really tough to envision how the tool works and stuff. And once you practice with it and you get used to what assets you have and you use this little tool like this little palette thing over here, I mean, that's big. I hope Fantasy Grounds or Smiteworks does this sooner than later. If they want to sell the assets and have people using them, something like this is really gonna. You can add a blank item here. So this is Bane put this together. So if you guys have never used this tool, it's really helpful, especially if you do a lot of painting. I'm not much of an artist when it comes to this, but definitely something you want to look at if you're someone who likes to paint and that sort of thing. So let's see what that is for the love of painting. And I'm going to get going soon, but I want to bring that. I'm going to put that in the chat because that's a really good extension. So Fantasy Grounds, and what we want to do is go to the website, make sure you're signed in, and if you haven't played Fantasy Grounds before, you do have to make an account, even if you're not going to buy anything, if you want to play. Then I'm going to go to the store. I went to the Fantasy Grounds Forge, and I already have it in my inventory, but I'm going to search for Bane because I know that he made it. He actually sent me a preview of this. It's pretty cool. When he first made it, he was really excited about it. And I said, dude, we got to get this out there, so we were really excited. So it was kind of fun. But if you look for Bane 7400, click on his, this is it. So Bane's Joy of Painting Asset Management Tool. This thing here, if you're going to use the Fantasy Grounds interface for making art, or you can also organize your WebM assets like fires, spells, and stuff. You can have them all sitting in there, so you can just drop them right from there onto your map. It's so useful. But I'm going to put that in the chat too. That's an important tool. So this is what I was using to store the assets on, which is really helpful. So basically you search for all your, or most of your assets you're going to use for your session, and what's neat is it'll save those as a record. So if you export it, let's say you wanted to just make asset packs, you could do that and make your own and just kind of make a module that has like all your different assets. So if you have like a dungeon asset pack, you can fill this up with a bunch of dungeon tiles and stuff, and then make another one that has like forest stuff and all your favorite stuff from the asset packs. Kind of make your own collection. That's basically what I'm trying to say. And then you can export this as a module, and as long as you have the art subscription and you have this extension loaded, and you bring this up, you'll be able to bring up your collections and use those in other campaigns. So you could do that. Spend an afternoon and go through all your assets and make your own collections, and then save them and export that module. And then every time you want to make maps in Fantasy Grounds or during your games, maybe it's spell tokens that you want to use, then you would use something like this. So what the spell tokens would do is, like on this side of it, this other tab, you just use this space for spell tokens. So if you're going to play in a game, and let's say you had a wizard, you could drop them on here, and when you're fighting against the players, you can just drag those assets out, and it'd be a lot easier to get to them than trying to search for them all or even using the shortcuts below is kind of clunky. I mean, it works, but it's not as quick and easy to access. So if I go to assets, I want to look for these are spell tokens. So these are tokens, so I want to look at tokens, not the images. So tokens do behave differently. So spell tokens and then spell assets are not the same thing, because one is static. It's on the map. You can't move it around if you're a player. Tokens can be moved as long as they're shared with the player. So let me go to... I know I have spell tokens in here, so I'm just going to look for them. I have a folder called spell tokens. So here's B9 spell tokens. We'll just use that as an example. So these are all the conical shapes. So that's not what I wanted. But this would work for, this is actually for Pathfinder. So if you play Pathfinder, this is all the different grid shapes. I don't remember where I picked that up. Spell tokens. And this works for the animated ones too, so. Okay, so these are all broken up into individual folders under the data. There we go, spell tokens. Hopefully this is the right one. See, this hesitates quite a bit because I have tons of them. So yeah, this is like a master folder. So let's just say you have, let's see, what is this? Maximilian's Earthen Grass, Mighty Fortress. There's some weird ones. These are like, okay, here's Spiritual Weapon. That's very common. So you put that on there, and when your cleric needs to use it, you just drag it right on the map. And it's a token too. So, anyways, that's just a little heads up there. It has nothing to do with the tutorial, but it is something that could be useful to you. So I was actually in the wrong mode when I dragged that over. So let me go to painting, go to palettes, bring that up again. And I want to go here and lock the map, bring the palette up, and see what this does. So I don't know if that's gonna do exactly what yeah, so that's not a token. That's basically an asset. So there's a difference. Spell tokens are actually tokens. You know, you're gonna be able to interact with them. But in this case, this is just an image. But nonetheless, you have access to that. So let me find something that's really a token. So I'm gonna go to assets and data. And then let's look at the spell token. I mean, being that it may be the way that this palette is set up, I don't know, but I thought that if you have this set up as a token, that you can use these just on the fly. So let's try Flaming Sphere, drop that in there. So I mean, you got quick access to it, that's for sure. And I'm also in the play mode. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think that's exactly what I thought it would do. But nonetheless, you got ways that you can, you know, drag and drop these. I don't know if this is going to be helpful for gameplay, but it's definitely for painting and making stuff. So we'll see. Maybe I'm doing something wrong. I don't know. But usually when you put a token on the map, it pretty much allows you to do it. So let me try that. So I go to data and then spell tokens. Instead of dragging it to the palette, I'm going to drag this down to the hotkeys. Okay, so this is a cloud kill token. Yeah, see, that's way different. That acts differently. So I have to ask Bane if he can fix that or if he can make another thing, because doing it like this is kind of painful. So this would be good for, you know, gameplay, so you can move these things around. Yeah. So it's not working exactly the way I hope, but nonetheless, you have access to that a lot quicker if you're going to do painting. So anyways, folks, you have a good afternoon. Enjoy your week. Happy Monday, and I'll see you around. And I think if you guys watch the show next week, they're going to have, I think, the werewolf vampire folks from World of Darkness are going to be on the Fantasy Grounds Friday show. And then in the Fantasy Grounds community, we have a Call of Cthulhu Keeper class coming up. So if you run Call of Cthulhu, you might want to see if you can join that. And then we also have another rule set, just handling chases and stuff in Savage Worlds. And then, let's see, what else? Let's see. I'm looking at our schedule. Okay, so we have Swayed chases, ground, foot, and vehicle things. So there's 2 events for that coming up. The 10th and the... Yeah, both of them are on the 10th. It's 2 different sessions. And then we have Call of Cthulhu on the 15th. And then we have a... What's this one? Mongoose Traveler. So if you're interested in those, then I'm going to put up probably a combat class or something different in our community. But take care, everyone. You have a good one.